What's up, guys? Welcome to Knockers on the Bottom. I'm your host, Jay Mill. Jay Mill, if you like. So let's get into it. So the Cowboys are doing their thing, doing lots of rounds of coaching interviews. It seems like they brought in quite a few people at this point, and they're looking to bring in quite a few more. It looks like they just completed Jonathan Gannon. They also completed Aaron White Cotton. I'm going to stick on that one for a second here. I don't know how to feel about that one, depending on the type of interview. I know some people are saying out there saying maybe they're just trying to get a feel for what Aaron White Cotton knew, or how he would be different than Matt Eberflus, or what was really going on, or seeing if he's a fit for some of the candidates, and all those things could be true. But also, I just want to keep in mind and remind you guys, and I'm not saying that this was a bad decision, but this was a team that said, we're going to interview, some people for head coaching opportunities. Oh, and then all of a sudden we start hearing Shadi's name, and then they got to go back to the table and kind of interview him again and again. And then all of a sudden they like what they hear, and he's hired as the head coach. So, and he was already here, he was already in house. And I'm not saying it was a bad hire, because I honestly like Shadi as a hire, but I'm saying, when Aaron White Cotton is getting these interviews, all of a sudden, that perks my ear up a little bit, because they really do like him, and he's already in house, and they're probably already thinking, hey, if a defensive coordinator has to come in, we don't know necessarily if he's going to want to keep this guy. So, we're going to try to, get a feel for him as well. So I think there's a couple of things at play here. I'm not saying that means Aaron White Cotton's getting a defensive coordinator job, but what I will say is it does remind me a lot of the Shoddy situation and how that situation started. Now, I feel like the Shoddy situation, we heard buzz after like 48 hours. So let's wait and see. By the middle of the week, if we're starting to get some buzz more on Aaron White Cotton and the Cowboys are talking to him again, then, I'd be a little worried, only because he was a part of the defense that was horrible. I know the defensive line did well. Also, not really sure what kind of stuff he would do scheme wise. So those are just questions there, though, because he's never been a defensive coordinator. Even somebody like Jim Leonard, who's never been a defensive coordinator at the NFL level, still was a defensive coordinator in college at Wisconsin. So he still has some sort of, experience putting together the entire game plan for the week and calling plays and making adjustments on the fly. White Cotton probably has a similar skill set, just in a smaller area, because it's concentrated on the defensive line. So I'm pretty sure the defensive coordinator is not making, every single adjustment at every single level of every single position. He might have certain hints or one word communications or certain reminders. And then, you probably have a lot of the position coaches, coaching up the guys on the in between plays as well, as far as techniques, what they're seeing out there. So just the little nuances that go into, typical NFL Sunday. I just don't know if I want to go that route, only because he was in the building. Now, maybe I would have felt different if the Cowboys still had this terrible season and they had never hired White Cotton, and all of a sudden he's coming in from somebody else's staff to get interviewed. Then maybe I would feel a little bit differently. So maybe this is one of those times that the Cowboys lens is kind of skewing things for me a bit, only because I'm very familiar with this person and what we've gone through in this season. So maybe this is one of those bad times for the Cowboys lens, but we'll keep an eye on it. And speaking of Jim Leonard, I would, I don't know if that's going to be able to happen either. I would like it to, which is what I was about to say there. I would like it to happen, but history tells you Vance Joseph, if he gets a head coaching job and moves on, then, Jim Leonard's probably promoted to defensive coordinator of Denver, or Vance Joseph poaches him for whatever staff he goes to. Now, if Vance Joseph takes these lines of interviews, doesn't like any of the positions, or doesn't get hired and stays at Denver, then I think the Cowboys have a better chance at landing Jim Leonard, because now he'll be able to get promoted from outside of that Arcus structure. He'll be able to say, all right, I can go here, have my own defense, make my own plan, and then hopefully that works out there. The Cowboys still haven't talked to Brian Flores yet, which is interesting, even though I didn't think he was going to be able to, wouldn't make much sense for him to kind of take the job. He did interview with the Commanders, and that was for their defensive coordinator position. So he is at least interviewing with other teams for that same position. So if I'm the Cowboys, I'm picking up the telephone and I'm saying, "Hey, man, come in for a meeting. Let's talk." The Cowboys have also rumored Chuck Pagano, which I know he's back. He's like an assistant coach, I believe, with the 49ers. It's either the 49ers or the Seahawks, but one of those two, one of those NFC West teams, he's on their staff right now. I don't know about that. I like Chuck Pagano. He was a good defensive coordinator, and then he had the unfortunate situation with getting really sick when he finally got his chance with the Colts, and then kind of went down that path. But I'm unsure about him only because I feel like it's been a while since he called a defense. And, even though he's a very knowledgeable person, to me, he's more along the lines of the type of coordinator I didn't want. He's someone that's a little bit older, a little bit more old school mentality, which is fine. But I need somebody who's going to, have a little bit better of a game plan against these more modern, these more motion shift, small slot guys, lots of on the move, faster, those type of adjustments, because the Cowboys have been very ancient on defense for a while. If you looked at Eberflus's defense, I mean, that defense relied heavily on talent, not so much on scheme. And, we didn't have the talent to match the scheme. If we get someone who's a better schemer, then, our talent might be okay enough to, make some things work. So I want to stay away from Chuck Pagano in that situation. But hopefully the Cowboys kind of narrow it down to a couple of these other guys, that they've been talking to, like the defensive backs coach. I can't remember his name right now, from Cleveland, or the defensive backs coach from Minnesota as well. So just they're throwing some names there that I haven't necessarily heard in circles beforehand, and I do like that. And I would rather pick from that crop than go to some of these other guys, the Jonathan Gannons, the Chuck Paganos. Even though Gannon's not an older guy, I don't I don't think we should kind of go there either. We might end up with the same situation as Eberflus. So I'm not too big on the Zach Orr thing too. They did bring him in for an interview, but I don't necessarily know how I feel about that one. The Ravens defense has been going downhill pretty consistently. So I think Zach Orr might be one of those guys that doesn't necessarily need time off, but maybe he needs some time on a staff, just to get away from the calling plays of it all, and then kind of make his way back into it. I do believe he'll get another chance, and I believe he'll be a good defensive coordinator once he gets his other chance. But he might need to be a linebackers coach for a little while, just to kind, and that's no, slight. I mean, Joe Witt's been a linebackers coach and a defensive coordinator in this league, so it's not like you do that and you're taking a step back, but it might give you a fresh perspective, on your defense and kind of what's going through the mind, when you coach it on a much smaller level. So those are some of the names floating around. Just wanted to get on, talk to you guys about those, and let me know how you feel about each of those names too in the comments below. Just write it down, type it out. Let me know how it feels. Maybe you'll change my perspective on some of these guys, or maybe you agree with me. Who knows? But also looked at a couple of players in the draft. So we did 3 last time. Now this time I looked at Rueben Bain. I looked at Sonny Styles, and I also looked at the linebacker. It's escaping me right now. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Okay, well, because I can't remember his name, I won't break him down until I can remember the name. This happens to me sometimes. If I remember it while I'm going, I'll let you guys know. But nevertheless, so Bain. Bain is an interesting character. I love the last name, by the way, all my comic book nerds. But yeah, I love the last name, Bain, right? So you expect him, he has that name, that he's going to be powerful, he's going to be square built, he's going to have, gigantic thighs and arms. And guess what? When you turn on the tape, that's exactly what you get, a guy that's just stocky, and he's, I mean, in real life, he's not a short guy, but for the NFL, he's a short guy. But man, he's built like a tank, man. He's very wide. He's very strong, sturdy, definitely sturdy. So it's interesting because my first thought when I first turned on the tape is he looks so powerful and he plays with that power. So when you see him rush a lot, you'll see him bull rush. To me, that's what I just immediately looking. So I kind of put him in a box right away when I first started viewing it, going, man, this guy's just going to try to be a guy that wins with power and a guy that's basically going to just try to run through the tackle and take him to the quarterback. Now, there were times on tape where you would see him run through the tackle and take him to the quarterback. Like he's strong enough to do that, at least in college. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that often in the NFL. He'll probably have some matchups where he can, but I don't know if he's going to be able to do that often. Now, the one thing I will give him credit for is as I watched it more, I kind of noticed that he is good with his hands, either smacking down the tackle's hands or using a rip move and then dipping his shoulder and capturing the edge, flattening the edge. A lot of times what will happen is guys will, use that dip move, right? They'll come off the line of scrimmage and they'll get their hands into the tackle and kind of brush his inside shoulder if you're rushing from the left side. If you're rushing from the right side, it will also be the inside shoulder, but it will be the opposite inside shoulder. So they usually try to, rip you with that inside shoulder to kind of get your base off balance. And then when you're trying to put hands on them, they're dipping that shoulder low to the ground. They're trying to get it kind of below your chest level, maybe above your belly button. You don't want to be too far dipped unless you just got that type of bend, but above the belly button. And then once they capture the edge, so once they get to your outside shoulder, because now your leverage is off because they, blew by you with that inside shoulder and then dipped to your outside and then captured the edge, usually you're taught to flatten that edge, right? But a lot of guys will keep going up the field because they don't have the bend to dip their shoulder low enough to get around the tackle. So even though they use that good move right away to get themselves free and get themselves to the correct shoulder to make a play, they're too tall and they're out of control. So a lot of them, you'll see them go up the field and the tackle's able to recover and just kind of push them up the field out of the play. You'll see a lot of quarterbacks step up and either run or step up and complete a pass. But what Bain does is when he gets to that outside shoulder, he does a really good job of flattening and chasing straight to the quarterback so that the quarterback has nowhere to step up. And because he's a little bit of a shorter guy, the tackles can't necessarily get hands on him to ride him up the field. And I feel like a lot of times with your taller pass rushers, guys will get their hands on you and ride you up the field. Now, a lot of times too, those rushers, if you have advanced rushers like Myles Garrett, they'll use that to do speed to power, right? They'll do that inside move. They'll dip that shoulder and get you off balance. And then when you're trying to ride them up the field, they'll just anchor and go right into you. And because your base is thin, you're on the ground, or they just threw you to the side and now they're getting the quarterback, which Bain also does. But just so you know, he does a good job of flattening, which is the thing we like to see when we're talking about pass rush, because the Cowboys a lot of times got pushed up the field this year, or and it sucks because we have the defensive tackles, so they would win on the inside, but your defensive ends would get pushed up the field. Quarterbacks would, have running lanes there, or they would step up and throw. It killed us a lot of times this season. So having somebody like that through a Cowboys lens will definitely be able to help. So I haven't watched all the edges. I think I would say, though, so far, I guess Arvell Reese and Bain would be the edges. And I would give the slight nudge to Reese. But Bain would be pretty much right there. So now the other player that we'll take a look at tonight, Sonny Styles. Or we won't take a look at him, but I'll talk about him. Uh, I have some concerns with him as a middle linebacker. So this is the problem. So I'll tell you this first. He's fast, and when he's going forward, like there were some plays I saw him go on like blitzes and attack the center of the pocket. He actually played with some power. Like he 243 pounds, and it showed up. But then there were other times where he was the middle linebacker and he was supposed to be the guy that basically like took on the offensive lineman in the run game and then stack them, which is, use your arms to keep the offensive lineman from getting into your body, because once they get close to you, they can control you and it's all over. And then once you decipher the play and figure out where the run is going, being able to not only use that to keep the distance, but then being able to shed them and go left or right and tackling the play. Now, there are some teams he did that very well with, but others he didn't, and I'm concerned if somebody like Tyler Smith gets a hold of him, or Tyler Booker gets a hold of him. He's probably not getting away. He's probably not going to be able to stack and shed. So I think, viewing Sonny Styles, I still think he's a first round player, and I still think he's a good player. I just don't think he's a Mike linebacker, and that's where the issue is going to come in, because I think he's a weak side linebacker. He is what DeMarvion Overshown plays for us right now. So, and the bad part is, I also feel that way about Maris Leofau. I think Leofau's best as a weak side linebacker. I think we actually have two weak side linebackers on the team, which is why we're struggling to get Leofau and Overshown on the field at the same time. And a part of me, envisions that if we had this crazy blitzing, weirdly schemed defense where we're coming from all angles and dropping other guys, then a lot of those guys would be great to have because they're athletic and they hit with some thump, right? So you can drop Maris Leofau in coverage and have Overshown blitzing and have Styles, buzzing underneath in the flats to take away something like that. You would kind of leave the middle of your defense open, but do we have a defensive coordinator that's like, hey, that 5-man front's pretty stout, so we can do some creative things on the second and third levels? I don't know, so we have to wait to see who the defensive coordinator is. But as far as if you're drafting Sonny Styles, you're not drafting him as a middle linebacker, in my opinion. You're drafting him as the Overshown role, which is the weak side linebacker. That's fine. But to me, I don't know if the Cowboys are ready to do something like that. They're not typically the team that's like, hey, we know we have this good star here, but he's been coming off a couple injuries. Let's draft a guy at his position, to either A, rotate, or B, set ourselves up that if he gets injured again, we're not killed on defense, right? He's a rookie, so I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense for the Cowboys. But as for the player, I think Sonny Styles is a good player. I think in college he was able to play middle linebacker. I do not think he's a middle linebacker at the NFL level. But that's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hit me up at knockersonthebottom at outlook.com, knockersonthebottom at gmail.com. Any comments, any questions that you have, I'll take them here via email, Twitter, whatever. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I love you guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Until next time, I'm your host, J Mill if you like. This has been Knockers on the Bottom. Peace.